Do you guys cut out the first part of the tape, or do they all start like Kairoot readers and me and everybody else standing and staring? You know, at the networks, they don't put up with that stuff. Welcome to Video School of the Air again. And we are presenting, of course, introductory hand gestures. Well, now, see, that was intermediate. That's face gestures when we get around to that. And for those of you who are pursuing this course via your TV set, I'd like to point out, to give you something to look forward to, the graduate course is in brain gestures, but we'll get to that later. From last time, I already got several notes. From last time we were taping, it said, in case, I'll just read one. I got several already. It said, in case you'd like to know, at least one person got something particular out of Wednesday's taping concerning the possibility of talk, words themselves being alive. It sure accounts for all kinds of stuff. And I'm just going to point out that, as I was trying to hint, it accounts for more stuff than there actually is stuff. Think about it. I want to mention something specific about the factions in life via man. And let's take a good, hard, that is, material example to start with, such as if you look at a factional aspect of life being the process of sexual reproduction. The way humans do it, that is. That you are still talking about a form of, if you can still see what I am pointing towards and take out your ordinary connotations of these words, to wit, combat and competition. Anytime you have a factional situation, you have got some kind of competition. Now, it's easy enough to see that there is competition of men and women trying to hit on each other, and you think you're trying to attract the person you want, and etc. And then there's also a form of combat involved, that you're trying to fend off somebody else that's trying to hit on the same person. And if you get good, and I do not mean this in the fisticuff sense, but even amongst the sexual partners themselves, there is a kind of combat going on. It is simply the nature of anything being factual, having factions in it, that there is a form of combat, if you'll take away your ordinary connotation, because it does not mean necessarily any sort of personal animosity going on between the two partners. But, having established all that to your clear satisfaction, what I want you to ponder, that within a factional situation, such as sexual, you have a different process entirely from that which would be asexual reproduction, wherein they are simply duplicating themselves. Because anytime you have a factional situation, you are getting reproduction not by duplication, but by mutation. This is entirely different, and it, of course, has, as always, in the three-dimensional level, more and more significance and pertinence the more you get into the areas of complex beings. Life having arranged itself in its own suitable fashion, all I'm doing is commenting on it with a slight twist, is when you're down to the more simplistic levels, the cellular level. Then asexual reproduction, that is an actual cloning, that one cell, after it splits, one amoeba looks like another amoeba. Maybe not to each other, no offense. But they actually clone themselves, and that they reproduce in one of the strict definitions of reproduction, that they actually reproduce cellularly what their parents were. But now also you should know that you get a little more complex, you even get into green beans or monks. Inside biological joke, I guess. Peas and monks, peas and friars. And, of course, into humans, no matter what you do amongst the human, you put together a man and a woman, and you produce an offspring. It is not a clone of either one. Now, you know that. And that's true with dogs. When you start, the more complex you get on the relative scale, the more this is true and pertinent, and there is a reason, I'm going to suggest. And all this is no secret in biology. whether they've ever looked at it in this manner or not. But there is no way, there's no possibility of sexually, when you've got factions. I'm saying sexual, you understand, as opposed to asexual, that a one-cell creature could clone itself. It can simply divide and produce offspring and keep the race of amoebas going. That with people, you have got factions. You have got men and women. Therefore, to reproduce themselves, what turns out, what the offsprings are never exact duplicates. Never, 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 never. With no comment yet as to good or bad, but never, ever, ever. It's impossible. So what you have, to bring us back up to date to give a small wrap-up, you have a factional situation, not a unified field of anything in human life. But inside this competition, inside this form of combat, is being produced, is being supported the continuation of the race of man, but with no possibility at any time of there being an exact duplication. That no matter how hard you tried, surely you understand this, no matter how hard you tried, you could not take even dogs, chimpanzees, much less humans, and reproduce them sexually as opposed to asexually, and get a clone, get an exact duplication of either of the factions. That is, either the mother or the father. The payoff being, I was going to suggest to you, not simply in the physical arena, but in the intellectual arena. Because there is strength. The ultimate strength, in a way, is in variation and not duplication. And again, I refer you back, if you're trying to keep a strict kind of three-dimensional scientific view of this yourself, which there is no conflict, is even in the more complex beings such as humans as opposed to amoebas. You do understand that the strength, just by ordinary observation, just taking evolution and the microbiotic, from the view of microbiology, that strength is going to come about through variation in the species, which is not the point that we're getting into, but there is no conflict. They even understand that in the city, that it is not through duplication. If it's through duplication, you would have what would be known on a more complex level as inbreeding, and it begins to turn on itself. It still does not duplicate, but instead of strength being produced, weakness is produced. That the flaws, the weak areas of the entities involved begin to magnify the weakness. There has got to be, for strength, for growth, there's got to be variation, not duplication. Quite well known in the city, although no great significance is given, but back where we were, that strength literally comes about through variation, not through duplication. But now, what is not considered whatsoever is this in the area of the human intellect. And that is what is of supreme interest and importance to anyone attempting to master the intricacies of hand and face gesture. I mean, of doing this sort of stuff. Have we still got problems? Well, I have had this pain in my... Oh. We're still on.
Yeah, we're just checking the timing.
How about some of the things that we have covered in the past that many of you thought made sense, such as don't think the same thing twice? And I know that every time we have mentioned this, that many people will whip out their handy little notebook and write it down, or your face will light up as it should. And in a certain way, though, the ordinary intellect would say, well, that may sound intriguing in some axiomatic way, but it seems to be impossible. If it is impossible, then you would have to say that asexual reproduction is impossible that sexual reproduction is impossible as opposed to asexual reproduction. Now this does not belie the fact that even if you think the same thing twice, you are not able in a spatial world, much less to take in the time element. You're not capable of actually thinking the same thing twice, but you are capable of thinking you thought the same thing twice, which if we had more time, I would go ahead and suggest to you, is so close to the same thing that it almost makes your little heart go, if your heart had a hand, I guess. Something repeated in a biological sense, stretching it very far, but not untowardly, that something repeated is dead. That if, when you get into more complex area, if indeed you could clone yourself, if you could have sex even with another faction of the human race and produce an exact duplicate, let us say, of you, no matter who you are, it would be a weakness. The entity would be dead. That is, it would have no new strength to offer. If it came out and it had all of the attributes, all the characteristics, all of the talents that you had, an exact clone of you, it would not be new strength in the body of life. It simply would not. It would not even be as good as you are. But there's no sense really trying to slap around the ordinary intellect any worse than we have to on a Friday. But you should surely enough of you acted to understand that if you could clone yourself, no matter who you are, no matter what a fine person, no matter how strong, how talented you are, if you could indeed engage in sex and reproduce you, it would not be a boon. It would not be of any profit to life to have repeated you, no matter who you are. It's not making any comment on you. It would not be an increase in the strength. It would not be an increase in the intelligence of life. And that is more at the specific heart of the idea that you should try and, or you should not think the same thing twice. It's not because of anything, it's not a specific comment on what you may have thought, that the thought was no good, that the thought was faulty. If you repeated it, you have cloned the original thought and you have not produced any new strength. And if you have not produced any new strength, you have produced, especially in the case of trying to do something unusual, you have increased your flaw level. You have increased your weakness. It is a form of inbreeding intellectually. The treatment for stagnation of all growth is agitation. Cloning, if you could do it, cloning would be a kind of blandishment. Cloning would be, as opposed to agitation, a kind of soothing. After all, what could be less aggravating, sweaty, than if you could clone yourself without having to go through the whole process of you-know-whatting? You don't have to take off your clothes, mess up your hair, and get all sweaty. You don't have to say, "Are you a Sagittarius?" Or you don't. If you could just clone yourself, in a sense, would that not be non-agitating? Again, I suggest to you, even at the physical level, but specifically at the intellectual level, would not only not produce any new strength, it would be a form of stagnation. Now all of this wraps back around on itself. I suggest to you at the three-dimensional level that all things that are alive are factionalized. No matter how strong they seem, no matter how straightforward they seem. The obvious examples, again, I guess, would be the religions of the world that start out, and nothing's wrong, but they start out and say something like, there is one great truth, or one great cosmic force, and the great force produced all of us, and it loves all of us, and we're all brothers and sisters. And in many, many people, this is the way life's innards are. That's technical talk from the South. The innards of life in man are in such a way that many people vibrate and go, oh, oh, oh. But that only happens for a few minutes. Because if this is going to survive, whatever group this is, it's going to split up. It's got to. It will factionalize itself. If it does not, it will stagnate and die. So anything alive in the three-dimensional world has factions. It has got the right wing, the left wing, the progressive, the conservative aspects, etc. And to even more subtle levels that we have been mentioning of the speaker and the listener and the performer and the audience. But there has, to keep the strength going intellectually, there has got to be factionalization inside the world of the intellect. Now this is certainly never taken in consideration. You can now forget all of those great little friars running around mixing up their peas and their beans and making them stronger. You get into the world of the intellect, and contrary, it is seen by those who would apparently be quite well equipped in the city to be thinkers and philosophers and social observers. The factionalization of human thought is seen contrarily as being the bane of human progress. That men, individual and institutions, are continually chided that why can't you people see the truth? Why can we not pull ourselves together intellectually? The reason we cannot is it would be deadly. But even thinkers at the ordinary level of the city, even those people, they have their own personal view, as they should, of certain things that are true, that are correct, and they cannot understand why there should be, especially amongst otherwise fairly intelligent factions of life, areas of the city, who hold opposing and obviously, patently, saliently erroneous views. What's wrong with life? What's wrong with man? Oh, all right, they didn't ask me specifically, but I'll tell them. Nothing! Or nothing. Contrary to what they think, it is good that the ordinary intellectual lamb has lions to flee from, to fear, to plan escape around, and to dance with when they must. And yet again, all of these metaphors come out in painting and poetry about this great peaceable kingdom wherein all animosity is a thing of the past, that there are no factions, that the great animal kingdom is represented through those great dining partners, the lamb and the lion. I don't know how that got started, but you understand what they intend by that allegory, that there'll be this great place where there are no factions. It would be a swamp. It would be a dying wetlands. It would be stagnation to the point that it would become morbific. You would be asking for death rather than yearning for that, rather than dreaming of such as that. The factionalization within the human intellect is what makes the dance continue, is what makes it that the lamb, if it was intellectual enough in its paradigmatic existence, would be glad there is a lion. It gives it something to think about. It plans its life around, well, how am I going out today and perhaps run a couple of miles without getting et? How can I go out and search for my own little food? How can I go out and be a diner without becoming his dinner? So much for the fairly innocuous prelude. That's the end of Intro Gestures 101. How about the one, again, that many of you seem to have liked? That it was pointed out on these tapings that all problems are caused by someone trying to help. Which I guess if that had come out from an ordinary city intelligence, it was taken over, it could become some sort of placard to go up on the wall of a new form of Murphy's Law or some sarcastic observation. It could make it a sarcastic observation, but it's worse than that. It is much, much worse. That's facial expressions and gestures. Much, much worse. It's beyond sarcastic. It's real, real close to being operative. But consider further in regards to what we're talking about. The whole idea, the reality behind my presentation of the fact that all problems are caused by someone trying to help has to do with there being internal factions in each individual, and of course then reflecting in the fact that there are factions between the apparent dance of two individuals even when they are apparently trying their best to engage in a fondling dance, a friendly dance, that I am only here in my dance capacity today, my relationship with you, at least on this one project, to help you. That is all I'm interested in. But the help always causes problems. Always. Not because of stupidity, not because that man is inherently evil, not that men say one thing and then unconsciously want something else. It's because that life is alive. It is because that for the dance to move, there must be at this level, the way his life is arranged through man, there must be the factionalization in the individual and between people. How about a nice, straightforward example? I'll just take, again, the kind of things that they're talking about nowadays again. Drug and alcohol problems, as it's called. Someone in the city, ordinary intelligence, forget the physical aspects because they consider that drinking and drugs still more or less is, if not anymore, an absolute character flaw, that is, absolutely in the psyche of man. It is still partially in the psyche of man, even if there is on some off chance, since full statistical proof is not yet available, that there might be some little operation going on in the human intellect, that is the brain, I think they call it, that might cause some people to say, I have an alcohol deficiency. They got no choice as long as they see the brain and the operations of the human intellect as being in some way, in any way, apart from the operations of the liver, the stomach. Then they still always see everything that happens as the individual has some personality quirk that was not caused by genetics that plays some part. Statistically, they do not have enough proof yet to know how much. But now let us take even their own kinds of observations and say, a person starts out drinking at some stage in their life. Why do they drink? I'm not playing psychologist, as you know, but I'll give you the kinds, using their own terminology that's accepted by the ordinary nervous system. They drink to help themselves. Now remember, I hadn't changed the paragraph, that all problems are caused by someone trying to help. A person drinks in the attempt to help themselves. I would assume that your brain is fast enough now to get beyond the crudest ordinary psychological cocktail descriptions. Although they're valid, they're just very crude, but to say, well, most people, or many people, I better stick to the statistical availability figures, that many people drink because they have psychological shortcomings. They're shy. They fear that they may sexually malfunction. They say dysfunction. Trying to be nice about it, they mean malfunction, but leave that to Lee Iacocca. And so they would say, well, people drink to try and compensate, to prop up their weak personality or whatever. You should be able to see a little more specific. Don't stop at that kind of crude description, but go just a little bit further and take it like this, that they are attempting to help. Now leave out anybody else, that somebody else says, here, have a drink and you'll feel better. That may or may not have taken place. Now consider that the idea that all problems are caused by somebody trying to help, put all of that inside of your own individual nervous system. An individual nervous system. Somewhere in that nervous system, we're in the factionalization. Notice how I've never said the balkanization. But the factionalization of the human nervous system, one part is trying to help another part. And it says, why don't you have a drink? Or have you ever tried it? And it tries it, and it seems, assuming that you were the sort, that you went, hey, having a drink at certain times is better than not having a drink. That this is helpful to me. And so it starts drinking. And what happens? Sooner or later, unless they're lucky enough to die early, but sooner or later they end up with a finger thing, a city problem. That is, an alcohol problem. Just as sure as hell. It just seems to be unavoidable nowadays. I don't have the statistics available, but the vast majority of people who drink now seem to become problem drinkers. But it started out their own nervous system. Now forget anybody else. Did advertising or their grandmother or somebody got them started? No. There was alcohol. Something to change the brain chemistry pronto. And they take a drink, and one part of them says, it's not nice. And another part says, let us say, well, it's not bad. One part attempts to help. And how does it end up? By ordinary city views, it harms. Now, do I have to make up other examples? I could use religion. I could use any kind of belief system. I could use secondary sexual hobbies. I could use almost anything going on in life. But I was trying to use something that was nice and straightforward, and you can make gestures and everybody knows what a drink is, or I could use cocaine. It starts out not as a problem. It does not harm amongst the factions involved. No one attempts to help you while trying to harm you. But all attempts to help end up hurting. I'm using their terminology. I'm using the way it looks at city level. But it is not between people. That is the cruder reflection of it. Is internally everything that you do to change the chemistry of your body, and then specifically here. It started out as an attempt to help. But now if you can get past all of that, why are things arranged to where one part attempts to help another? To keep it from stagnating. It is a kind of internal non-sexual reproduction without being duplication. Because if the attempt to help inside of you did not harm, then the attempt to help would duplicate itself. Whatever it was. Come on, I knew it. A couple of you fell. I drug you right up there, all right? Let us take alcohol, because this is a good one, because it doesn't make any sense. But if it was not factionalization, if all attempts to help did not eventually hurt, I'll repeat one more time, that's their terms. It's got nothing to do with help and hurt. If this were not true, then let's take alcohol, since I'm about to drive it to a ridiculous extreme. Then, one part of you, somebody hands you a drink the first time, you take a sip, and your body goes, ugh. Then in a few minutes, it kind of gets the brain chemistry. No sense going through gestures. I'll tell you exactly what it is. It gets the brain chemistry, and if your brain chemistry is such that one part of you says, that's not near as bad as my stomach and throat thought it was a couple minutes ago. I like that. And another part of you says, aha, we'll have another on me. Now it's attempting to do good. Remember where we started this, that all attempts to do good eventually harm. That is, all problems are caused by somebody trying to help. So this somebody now is inside of you, and it wants to help. And it says, well, you do feel better? Yeah, I like that. Well, I'm glad. I'm glad I got you to do it. Now, if that was the end of it, and it caused no problem, then the thing in you that said, let's put alcohol in our bloodstream and get it to the brain because it does us good. It makes us better. It helps me. If that were true, and it helped, it would be deadly. That is, if the attempt to help actually produced what it said, it would duplicate itself. And it would not cause strength. Do any of you follow this? In other words, every time you try to change and try to do good, it's got to do harm because that's what makes you grow. But in the city, everybody goes, well, foy on that. Or people say, I failed. Or people say, well, I may be succeeding in trying to change, but Jesus is breaking my back. It's breaking my soul, my spirit. I can't stand this. And they don't understand that that's a sign of health. Not of theirs, not as they see it. Because if any attempt to change actually changed, exactly as it said, then what it would have done would be asexually, now metaphorically speaking, of course, but it would have asexually cloned itself. It would be a reproduction of itself, and you would have inbreeding. Any attempt to change cannot duplicate itself. That is, it cannot absolutely succeed, or it would turn out, intellectually speaking, more and more of those little kids that played the banjo in Deliverance, sitting up on the bridge. You know. For those of you who drank in the past, it looks like your worst nightmare after a 2 or 3 day binge to climb up on the sink and finally look up in the mirror, and you look like the poster boy or girl for inbreeding. Well, against inbreeding. Am I safe in jumping from this paragraph, because 2 or 3 of you got it so good there for a second. I know how hard it is to keep. I can't resist a small little wrap-up. All problems are caused by someone trying to help. And all of you can see that, even back at an old level of being sarcastic and listening to your old brain intelligence saying, yeah, that's true. You don't know why. And if you really tried to straighten up a man and be intellectual, you'd say, well, there's got to be exceptions to that. And of course, there you'd go, being your old self, because there are no exceptions to it. All problems are caused by somebody trying to help. Now, it may be outside your dance area, but any problem that you've ever experienced was not caused by somebody anywhere saying, God, I'm bored. And boy, do I dislike old so-and-so. I know what I'll do. I'll give him a problem. Even if this ever happened in life, it is a very ephemeral mutation. Life does not abide that. It is a pimple. It's an ingrown hair, and it's over with. Because any time that you've had a problem, any time there has been institutional problems on this planet, it was not caused by an individual or some other group or some other institution saying, hey, let's give those other guys some grief they'll remember. It started out somebody attempting to help. Always. But then if you get past the descriptions of help or harm, because you've got to get past them, in the same way you've got to get past ordinary city intelligence, or this is insanity. Because I can disprove just what I said. I don't even have to disprove to ordinary intelligence that is a crock. That there's been all sorts of evil going on a historical and a wide level, and in my life, things have been done to me that people knew what they were doing, and etc. They knew that they were going to mistreat me and give me a problem. They all start out using their terminology again. If they're going to say that somebody caused me a problem, the problem started out maybe not in your immediate dance area over there, of them trying to do good just specifically for you at some time that you could identify. But the problem came about after somebody attempted to help. Now take it all, turn it internally to the forced dialogue that you have with yourself throughout your existence. Your brain talking to itself, you talking to you considering other ideas, you think you just heard it over the radio or you just read it. It's still you talking to you. It is the energy of life running AC. It is the factionalization wherein your nervous system does not speak. Your brain does not speak with one voice. There are the same factions in your intelligence, in the operations of your nervous system, the same way there is in your respiratory system, your circulatory system. And it's specifically here, not just in the brain chemistry, but in that which ordinary neurology now still cannot decide whether the operations of the intellect is actually tied to and inseparable from the operations of the brain, etc. I'll again use the kinds of maps that they're using, that the operations of the brain, the intellect itself, surely is floating in there somewhere and is not tied to just chemicals. They're not correct. But to even use their description, that's what I was trying to give you a little foot in the door, to use their descriptions, they could still not understand why there should be factionalization inside of the operations of the brain. And why there should be some kind of competition that if the brain could operate, if the mind could operate, if people could be instructed enough and educated enough to see the truth about anything, then they would see that, well, all right, this is true. Now I can quit wasting my time on this and talking to myself I don't have to investigate this. I don't have to go listen to some other damn lecture on this matter, because now I see what it is. And that's not the way it operates. And they see it as being a shortcoming. It is one part of the intellect, to move up to that area exclusively for a second, it is one part attempting to help the other part. And not far removed from one part saying, have a drink. Put some of that alcohol in the brain, and it's an improvement. I am helping you, and it says, yes, that is a help. And then it turns in irreversibly, unavoidably, into eventually a problem, by their definition. Because anything that is ordinarily called help or a boon, profit in the city will eventually be an expense. It will eventually be a problem. But now, that whole situation is not a problem. The situation is not something run awry. It is not something to be straightened out. It is a matter of the reproduction of the world of the intellect in such a way that each generation is stronger. It is more expansive, not weaker. Because internally, if you, or anybody, but if you were of a single mind, but see, ordinary people would think that that would be some kind of great enlightenment at the ordinary level. If I had no doubts, no ambiguities, no uncertainties, and I simply was of one mind, forget, institutionally speaking, of some group that'd be good if we, all the Democrats or the Christians or the Jews or the Arabs, if we were all of one mind. I mean, that sounds like an earth-shaking possibility. That if we were all of one mind, us here, this little library club, this bird-watching society, if we were all of one mind, oh, the influences we could have over courses, especially of facial and head gestures. I mean, over matters out in the world. And what they're dreaming of, if we could actually be fanatical. But now you remember, I thought to everyone's satisfaction, the last few tapings, it was pointed out to you that if indeed a fanatical group, if fanaticism could be institutionalized, and you had a group of true fanatics, they're not the ones you hear in history. That's not the ones that apparently rape and pillage and plunder history and sack Rome. That was not a group of fanatics. Even historically, you should be able to look at that. No one's ever accused, that I know of, even historically, of Gaiseric or Attila of having a group of fanatics. Think about it. There's a bunch of wild peas. They were kind of herded up, and he was playing Mandel to all these little runners. But it was not a group of everybody marching in lockstep. It was a bunch of wild people. That's all he could do to hold them together. I'm using their description. No, he was constantly afraid. He was a man worse than riding the tiger. You know that old story about how dangerous that is, because you can't stop, you can't get off once you're on it. Now, that's nothing. Think about riding Visigoths, oligoths. In other words, the forerunners of Germans. A true group of fanatics, if they ever existed in an institutionalized version, you never heard of them, because the ones you heard of were not of a like mind. It was not a fanatical situation. It was factionalized. That is where strength is, regardless of any historical qualitative judgment that could be given to any great or any particular occurrence that happened. But it is always factionalized. If anything is alive, if anything is having an impact on life, it has internal factions. Back to the intellect. If anything is alive on this planet, it's the human intellect. If anything is growing, it is the human intellect, in a way that can be seen. Physically, people are not mutating. You do not see that from one generation to another. We're not growing new eyes and arms and ears. The intellect changes. Oftentimes it's looked at another way, that the amount of information, technology, science is changing. It's the intellect changing. Oftentimes in the city, they look at progress as being, well, we've got now not only larger telescopes, we've now got the Hubble telescope up in orbit. We now not only have a particle accelerator, whatever the largest is, 50 miles, we're going to have one that's 80 miles in diameter. And they look at that as being a sign of progress, which is right in the city, but that is not what's expanding. It's the human intellect, where they think these things came from. We don't have time to stop there, but there is another beautiful area that I've hit in other ways for you before, of how the human intellect cannot turn upon itself in any reasonable fashion at its ordinary level. Because that Surely some of you saw what I was pointing at. It is not technology that's improving, or the breakthroughs in science, that is improving man's intellect and opening up his intellectual horizons. If anything, that's backwards. And I could even get ordinary intellects in the city for a second to see what I'm saying. They'd go, yeah, you're right. You know, having that telescope up there in orbit is much fun and secondary hobby as it may turn out to be. That is not going to increase man's intellect. Man's intellect was increased is why that thing's up there. And it continues to fuel itself, this kind of cycle. But it is not technology, it is not science, because that is back into the old, great, beautiful intellectual trompe-l'oeil of believing that man's intellect can be separated from man, that thoughts, that information, progress in some way can exist apart from people too, be causing progress, or be the conduits for progress, for change. Back to where you were. You didn't lose your place, certainly not. Therefore, every part of the human nervous system, everything that you seem to think should be changed in you, things that you believe that you have felt, thought, done, that should be rectified, that you should no longer do again, that you should suffer some sort of guilt about, none of this can absolutely come about. That is, you cannot absolutely free yourself of guilt any more than you can absolutely break a hobby. If you smoke, you can stop smoking. But in the city, what do they say? In the city, like everything else, people that are trying to break a hobby nowadays, they all get together and form an institution. But what do they say? They say, well, or drinking. Maybe that's a better one. You know, the ones that stand up and say, yes, I had a drinking problem. I don't drink anymore, but I can't say that I'm no longer a drinker. Of course, they say alcoholic. I'm an alcoholic, I just don't drink anymore. But once you're an alcoholic, you're always an alcoholic. Do you hear what they're saying? Or people that say they quit smoking. You say, well, how long has it been? Oh, a long time. Well, really, how long? Well, since you asked, 2 years, 14 months, and they remember exactly. You say, do you ever still want a cigarette? Somebody will say, well, ask me better, is there any time I don't want one? That kind of thing. I'm using very crude but material examples. In other words, when somebody thinks they change in a city, that is the attempt to help. It does not duplicate itself. It does not asexually clone itself. That is what seems to go from point, or to turn point A into point B, or point A into anti-A. It cannot be done. It would be deadly. Over long range, it would stop humans from growing. It would be a form of intellectual inbreeding. It would produce weakness. Does anybody see where this really points to before it runs out? That means at the ordinary level in a city, nothing can get done. Oh, I know they got the first stories that, well, we're making progress. But you have got to be tied to what? EP. Episodic consciousness. Because in that case, there does seem to be life cut up into these little episodes, into little scenes, sentences that talk itself. The first story is that, hey, if talk has any meaning, then the sentence has got to have some meaning. It's got to go with the laws of grammar. The rhetoric has got to be reasonable. You're talking about episodic thinking. You're talking about the kinds of chemical, electrical bursts in the human nervous system that you seem to look here, you seem to think one thing, you go, okay, I heard that. And it comes in sentences. It comes in bursts of energy that verbally, intellectually seems to have a beginning and an end. Except this, there is no beginning or end to these little beginnings and ends. But as long as you are operating on the basis internally yourself of episodic consciousness, then what seems to be episodic explanations and analyzations for what's going on, insofar as you hold your, and you don't try to push it, that your attention is held within the episode, there seems to be some sort of passing sense to it. Oh, all right, I'll make it crude. Instead of life being some kind of endless, or at least seamless, panorama that you went through for 70 years, since that's not the way the ordinary intellect works, then let's assume that you look at your life as being like a daily soap opera, or a weekly sitcom that you tune in. But you turn it on, and the sitcom got the same characters, that is you, But each show is some sort of little drama. Boy finds girl, boy loses girl, boy gets girl. Be about job, be about anything. But within those 30 minutes, as within the episode, there seems to be a quite definite beginning. We tune in again, and here they are, the family sitting around the table, and one of your factions, in the episode, goes, hey, Dad, I want to borrow the car tonight, and I'll be real careful. I don't know whether you will or not. Yeah, I promise I will. Well, all right, here's the keys, but don't you drive fast. And so we know. They got to fill up. The commercials can't take but another 12 minutes out of it, so they got to have at least 13 minutes worth of drama and entertainment. So we know something's going to happen. So you start off somewhere, even though, again, is when I brought up the old dramatic idea in medias res that everything comes in the middle. Except ordinary consciousness does not look at it that way. You turn it on, and here it is. The Henry Hogwarth show. And so it seems that there's the family sitting around, the Hogwarth family, and they're discussing the car and all that. But you came in the middle of somebody's life. But we're just talking about a TV show, right? So it's got to start somewhere. There they are. And one of them says, boy, I'm glad it's Friday. So we've established it's Friday there in the Hogwarth household. And they're eating supper. So we know it's late in the afternoon. And the little nipper says, Dad, can I borrow the car? So we know it's getting closer to dark. He's going out. But we still came in the middle of their life. But in episodic consciousness, it makes no difference. It can't make any difference. You go nuts. You can't go see a play and sit down. And suddenly it shows the witches out there boiling around this, and you go, wait a minute. And you want to know, how'd the witches get here? And where's this guy Shakespeare? I mean, where'd they show up from? Who got them all here together? And is that all there are? Are they part of a union or something? No, you can't do that. You got to sit down, and the curtain opens, and there they are. Trouble, trouble. You just got to take it. It started somewhere. Ordinary consciousness has this impression, as it's supposed to, that life almost has some sort of sense to it. But only on the basis of it being episodic. Because once the show's over, at the end of 30 minutes, the kid went out and wrecked the car, he lied to his father, and you watch the show all the time and you think, you shouldn't lie to your father. I've seen this show enough. He's a decent fellow. I mean, the way they write this character, you should have just told him what happened. Plus, somebody hit you. It wasn't your fault. You were driving the speed limit. We saw you. You can tell him, he'll believe you. And so things seem to be kind of out of kilter. You think, oh, that's not like that little kid. And you turn to somebody with you, and you say, that's not like him. But at the end of 30 minutes, what happens? In some way, the old man says, one of our neighbors said they saw you driving, and you're obviously well within the speed limit, and they saw their car hit it. So come here, kid. It wasn't your fault, and everything's all right. And all the family kind of gives a big old hug. They start rolling the credits, and they see you tune in next week. All right, it's apparently those 30 minutes, that episode, almost made some sense. But you have got to continually play in medias res. That you come in the middle, but it seems to make sense, and then you look off. And so episodically, life apparently forms these little sentences that has a beginning, capital letter, and then has an end with a punctuation. Okay, period, a question mark, an explanation. But these episodes, episodic consciousness, what it cannot conceive of is there is no limit to episodes. And it can only take each little one as making sort of some sense. But if you say, wait a minute, where did all this start? Where's it going to? What happens between episodes? What happens when you look off? It's not equipped to do it. It's not supposed to. It's no shortcoming. Ordinary intelligence cannot do that. Ordinary intelligence is then left with the impression that all attempts to help, even itself, ends up causing difficulties. You mean I went through that and you didn't even get it again? All right, look at it this way. You watch the show this week, and the family has another crisis, and then they realize that the old man knew best, or the mother knows best, and they all hug and say, well, we'll never doubt each other again, plus, Dad, I'll never buy the car again. And they all agree to that, and you think, well, finally, what a great bunch of guys, and they're all hugging each other, and they realize that they shouldn't jump to judgments with each other. And you think, phew. But you watch. You wait 1 week and turn back on that damn show, and it'll be the same kind of thing again. Right? If the episode actually made sense, if the drama, if the conflict, the human combativeness between even family members, if it indeed cloned itself. That is, the attempt to help did help, you'd turn on to the show next week and there would be no show. Everything that the human intellect at the ordinary level attempts to tell itself that, here, let me help you. And no longer now. You got to get past the point right quick. We're talking about chemically adding alcohol and drugs, because it happens in the area that not only we're going around time, but I was going to try and point out to you again the possibility of words being alive, and I was going to get into another area beyond that. But it is energy, and get past now the one faction of you watching episodes of intellectual consciousness in you saying, well, here, let me help. You enjoyed a drink last time. You've been enjoying a drink every afternoon for the last 20 years. Here, have another one. Get past what appears to be quite material chemicals, such as alcohol. Your brain attempts to talk to you, one faction of it, as you should be more religious. You should be more humane. You should try and calm your temper. You should pay more attention to other people's desires. All of these are attempts to help. And what do? They eventually become a problem. Now, it may not appear to be the same kind of problem, certainly, as becoming an alcoholic at the city level. But what does it do if nothing else? It produces something, if you had any real interest in your own intellectual welfare, that's worse than alcoholism, is guilt. But guilt's just a word. Guilt is manure. Guilt is the friar's little peas and beans going, whee! Each new generation going, I'm a bigger pea than before. I'm a bigger bean than my parents, my ancestors were. But if there had been no factionalization in there, if there had been no combativeness, if there had been no competition, if there had been asexual reproduction, there can be no guilt, no improvement. No offense to Mrs. Stein, but it would be an amoeba is an amoeba is an amoeba is an amoeba is an amoeba. Never change. No better, no worse. And of course, if the object is to grow, then no better is worse. We got, that fits in with our gesture course, doesn't it? As long as one's intelligence, as long as one's intellectual existence is based on the dichotomous Punch and Judy show, you remember. Two obvious players, visible players, and one actor. A single source as opposed to the two players. As long as your ordinary intelligence is based upon that kind of Punch and Judy show, into that kind of division inside of your own nervous system, which is quite proper and natural, of it being between a performer and an audience, between a listener and a speaker, between the dominant and the submissive in you, between the ruling powers and the bourgeois. As long as that is the limits of the way you can think, then you are left with always that all attempts to help harm. But now getting into a specific way that you surely can at least realize the need, if not the possibility, to look on the words harm and help, because it's not just attempting to break some kind of habit like drinking or smoking. But what you attempt to tell yourself that, well, I should think so-and-so. I should try and repeat to myself, be a good boy, be a good boy. Be a nicer person, be a nicer person. Whether it seemed to be under the institutional guise in direction of a religion, a philosophy, a new book, or just your own wisdom. If it is still based on the Punch and Judy, if it is limited to that movable little theater that is always a division, that you are dealing with the factionalization still of the human intellect, then any attempt to help from that same view, from that same definition, will harm. That is, it will not succeed. It cannot succeed. Once you see it by its own definition, which it cannot define, it has to be done outside of it, which I, don't thank me, attempted to do. On that basis, not only will all attempts to help harm, all attempts to change reinforce. Does anybody remember that many times we used to talk about don't even tell yourself what you're doing? I assume by now some of you can see even a more extensive variation of that. Not only don't tell yourself what you're doing, if you apparently succeed, by all means, don't applaud. Don't show any signs of, bravo to you, sir. That is to yourself. Good show. Don't ever do that. Because even if there is the apparent success between Punch and Judy, the apparent success is reinforcement. Not of the success, because the success is not perfect. It is not complete. If it is an actual clone of itself, you won't even notice it. And if life operated on that level at a wide horizon, then life would be dying. Humanity would be dying. And it's obviously not. I don't guess there's any way, unless I used a lot of gestures, within 2 minutes to wrap up all of this, is there? Sure there is. Go forth and cheap shot. But I was out of expensive bullets, so. Shall I do the next hour's tape in 90 seconds? Well, let me make a suggestion then in closing. Over the weekend, if you don't have anything really pressing to do, is consider with no reservations, no exceptions, specifically and particularly all the great things you've thought about. No sarcasm, but all the great things that you thought before. That you thought that either you thought of or that you got from somebody else, a book, the wisdom of humanity. And all of it is in a form of combativeness. Is there a reason you remember it? Is this idea sound superior to the ideas I have, if I could just remember them, etc. And then you can't remember them. Or the greater they seem to be, the more difficulty it is, apparently replacing your old ones. Let us say that you like Buddha's idea about something, or Jesus, or Moses, or Plato, Aristotle. And you keep wanting to repeat it. You write it down, you even have it tattooed, this one idea. And you just know it has great importance. It just makes your nervous system tingle when you think about it after having repeated it many times. And yet it cannot apparently become a continuing part of you. That is, you cannot seem to replace the ideas that are along the same lines but are not quite as valid, not quite as piercing, as expansive and manifold as Plato's. And so what you're trying to do is replace yours with that. That your ideas are dancing with this Plato's idea about this one thing, and Plato's idea is still submissive. Your idea keeps dancing forward, and it keeps going backward. And it keeps fluttering its eyes, lowering its head, and playing Little Miss Coquette. And what you're trying to do is replace and reverse the situation. You're trying to get Plato's idea, which is now somewhere in your nervous system, to help your idea. You're trying to make it asexually reproduce and clone itself and do away with yours. And you can't seem to do it. And yet you seem to be involved with an admirable try. It seems to be fun to try and remember it. And if I said, well, you've never succeeded, have you? And you say, well, no, I haven't. And you'd probably smile if you were philosophically inclined. That was part of your hobby. And you'd say, well, it's kind of fun, though, just struggling with it. Which I'd have to say, I'm with you. If that's your hobby, by God, all right. But I want you to try and notice over the weekend why things are arranged, not psychologically, not spiritually, not philosophically, electrically, which is the bottom of chemistry. Yeah. But they're arranged electrically so that ideas that apparently can help can't really help. It'd be suicidal. Goodness, no matter by whose definition, cannot clone itself. Thank God. We're out of tape, so I don't know who I'm talking to. Posterity. Prosperity? Bye. We'll get into 102 gestures.